Before I begin, I would like to thank the organizers and particularly Jerry, Paddy, I don't know if they are around, and the whole committee for inviting me to this very, very exciting meeting. I'm particularly thankful to these gentlemen for the reason that they decided to have a plenary on neglected issues, because India and many parts of the world, there are issues. It's the matter of magnitude, which is huge. It's also very complex issues and sometimes requiring very unique issues and requiring unique solutions. So I hope that I will be able to bring to focus some of those issues that are required. So I begin with first one or two slides that some of you might recall from last year. The slides have not changed. The numbers might have changed. But just to give you an idea of the magnitude of problem and the complexity as well in first few slides before I come to the solutions, possible solutions that I see. India, of course, is a huge country. In many senses, it's countries within a country. It's the second most populous country with 1.35 billion people, home to almost 18% of the world population, and which is almost 3 times the EU population. So it's a huge and large. It's also a very young country. Almost 65% of population are aged less than 35. So that makes it a very, very vulnerable section of society to various temptations, including getting into wrong lifestyle factors. So, and then the further of this population group, almost 3/4 are rural population. So they are little disadvantaged. The education levels of awareness, economic status, all are poorer than the city dwellers or the bigger cities. On top of it, this year the International Monetary Fund finds India the fastest growing economy and driver to global economy, which means people's buying capacity is increasing, and so they are more prone to getting tempted to adapt to situations that are most undesirable, and at least we are discussing that in great details. And then the society is multilingual, so we have almost 122 distinct languages in the country, not to talk of dialects, and the multiple religions and so on and so forth. So it's a very, very complex situation. Now, it's also the 3rd largest tobacco producing country, producing almost 800 million kilograms every year, multiple varieties. And if you look at the top right bar diagram, you will find in red the Indian produce, which first 2 varieties are nearly 1/3 or 50%, but the last one that India produces almost several-fold higher than rest of the world in terms of a type of tobaccos. The government, of course, considers this a demerit item, but also there is a Tobacco Board of India by Ministry of Commerce and Industries, which looks after tobacco growing, its marketing, its pricing, subsidies, and so on and so forth. All this makes India the 2nd largest consumer of tobacco products. And this landscape of tobacco consumption is very widespread, and I call it a rainbow pattern, the usage pattern, because it has multiple colors in it. If you look at the simplistic one on the lower part of the cartoon, you will find that cigarette smoking population, amongst those who use tobacco, cigarette smoking population is the smallest of the problem, almost just about 15%. Other types of smoking, which is I call alternative and local forms, and BDs and hookahs and water pipes and chillums, there are multiple names. They make it almost 30% of that population. But even larger is non-smoking tobacco, which accounts for almost 60, 56%. So it's very, very huge and complex. And then this considerable variation in tobacco usage pattern across the country comes, is based on gender, religion, economic status, literacy, awareness, multiple factors affecting that. Overall, I would say that dominant user of tobacco are men, almost 80%, about 20% or under 20% are women. Males are also dominant smokers, but women are the dominant smokeless tobacco users, and that's a huge variation that you will see. And so we have all kinds of tobacco using population. Smokers of varieties of things, then we have smokeless tobacco and the dual user. So we have multiple issues, multiple challenges therefore. Now the smoking, as I said, has the smallest segment of the population smokes cigarettes or cigars or roll your own and so on and so forth. Alternative forms of smoking, which is BDs and hookahs and shisha and chillum, and I will show you a snapshot of this rainbow snapshot to give you some idea of what it is. And then smokeless tobaccos has varieties available into it for suiting every taste, every economic status, every culture, and with attractive labels to make it safer, for instance. And betel nut, the last one on which I have worked for over 3 decades, and WHO, of course, puts it in the non-smoking, smokeless tobacco category. But betel nut is not tobacco. It's another form of masticators that people use in large quantities. And that becomes, in my opinion, and I'll show some data, where this is a gateway effect to smokeless tobacco chewing and then to smoking tobacco in various forms. So look at the widespread varieties of options that people have, where you see on the top left that standard cigarette packs, which are of standard size or smaller, on filterless, and then we have BDs. If I can show here the BDs of varieties of choices in BDs. There are mint BDs, BDs in packings, which looks like cigarettes. So this is for more urban population. These are for rural population. And then we have other varieties which use tobacco, which is totally handmade. All these have absolutely no quality standards or controls. So it's almost home industry where BDs are produced, or even these tobacco mixes are produced, which are used in these kinds of pipes, making it very, very dangerous. And there is a huge population that's dependent on that. And then we have smokeless tobacco varieties coming in various shapes and sizes and with various additives added to suit different tastes and so on. They are relatively inexpensive, so very easy to get into it. All these cigarettes and BDs and others are also possible to buy one stick, so virtually costs nothing. So it's very, very tempting for young people to get into it right from the beginning. And then we have, of course, betel nut, which are nuts full of alkaloids. They are class 1 carcinogens, and they are used in quid form in a variety of mixes and becomes a starting point for getting into the habit of tobacco. So it's kind of this magnitude, and look at the GATS2 data, which just came out half a year back for India. GATS surveys, it's ongoing. 22 countries' data have been analyzed and published, and India was the last to be published, which was in January this year. And according to that, every 5th Indian is a smokeless tobacco user, and every 10th Indian is smoking tobacco in one or the other form. That's a huge burden to a nation which is 1.34 billion people. Then what is very disturbing that the prevalence increases with increasing age in India. That's something very unique. Not many countries show that. And GATS2 puts 48% prevalence in 65 plus years old people, which means there is hardly any attempt to get out of this habit. The prevalence keeps increasing. It's steady increase if you look at the whole report. The average daily expenditure is very low, so they are relatively inexpensive. Cigarettes and BDs and other kind of smokeless tobacco. And cigarettes, which are most expensive, also cost just $0.50 for a day, which is quite affordable for an economy which is growing very fast. So more and more people are getting tempted into it. Age of initiation is pretty low. The average of GATS countries so far, 22 countries that have been scaled, is under 20 years. But India, for men, it is 18.3, and for women, it is 17.2 years, which is pretty low, again. And quit ratio is second lowest. So all indicators are very, very alarming. The government applies the standard tobacco control measures, which we all know, so taxation, pictorial warning, public place smoking bans, and so on and so forth. And there are apparent differences. I have noticed that in cities, it does make a difference that you don't see smokers very openly going around. And there is, according to GATS report, from GATS 1 survey to GATS 2 survey, so 2009 to 2017, the overall reduction in tobacco usage is 6%, which actually translates into 8.1 million less tobacco users in the country. So some solace. There is decrease in the prevalence of tobacco uses among youth, which is also 17%, not so bad, and increase in the age of initiation by average 1 year, which is also encouraging. So there are some positive impacts coming from what governments are doing, the standard way of tobacco control. But when we look at the disturbing trends and then readjust these advantages, then we realize that we need to do more. For instance, the population has increased tremendously, and I took data from 1990 to 2016 because I want to compare with the same period data of the disease pattern that is prevailing. And if you look at it, in this period, the population of India increased by nearly 48%. So if you adjust to this increase in population to the figures that downslide that one sees in smoking, it is going to be smaller and therefore not very impressive. What is most disturbing is that women outnumber men now, even though overall men dominate the smoking landscape in India. But now women amongst the heavy smoker category, which means 20 cigarettes plus, women are outnumbering men. Even though they are not very open, they are not comfortable smoking in public, but it is increasing, and that's very disturbing. The tobacco expenditure ratio has increased between 2 and 3 times in this period, which again is disturbing because the more people are capable of purchasing tobacco in various forms. Betel nut remains the gateway, shows the gateway effect, and the changing disease profile, demography clearly shows that in this period where in 1990 the dominant 10 disease patterns, top ones were basically infectious diseases, and ischemic heart disease or COPD occupied 6th and 8th positions in 1990. And they are now, in 2016, first and second in the disease pattern that is prevailing in India. And this report came in December 2017 in Lancet, and it's a very, very alarming that COPD and ischemic heart disease become number 2 and number 1 disease prevailing in the country to last year. So that's very disturbing, and that means the tobacco control measures that has been going on are not enough to cope with the problem. We need to strengthen it. We need to add other avenues of tobacco control, including harm reduction, and that's something that governments have not been able to get. So, what are the solutions? The solutions, because we have multiple problems, there can be no one jacket fit all solution. It has to be different. As I look at it, the smokers, which are of cigarette type, that's about 110 million estimated smokers as per GATS2 report. Very, very disturbing fact there that almost 80+% of this population knows the bad effects, the harmful effects, health effects of cigarette smoking, but under 50% smokers ever intended to quit, and only under 40% ever attempted to quit. The success ratio is very, very poor. So despite knowledge, people are not able to quit, and so we need to intensify advocacy to this. This is cigarette smoking population is also the most aware, educated population. They are aware of various technologies that are coming in, and Dr. Farsanillos, he's not around, and I have just completed a study less than 2 weeks back. We have not been able to analyze all data, but I'm going to show some encouraging data on e-cigarettes, because that's something which is catching up in India, particularly amongst the younger people, because they know it's significantly safer and it appeals to them. And I will show you some data which shows that newer technology with quality assurance is definitely going to make a difference. The second segment of people who need help are those who smoke alternative forms of cigarette. Now, this number is much larger. There is no credible data on it, but GATS2 put it to about much above 210 million. So that's the cigarette smokers are less populous in India than other forms. So we have many more people smoking alternative forms of cigarettes in India, the local varieties. They are of all ages, cultures, economies, and ethnicities, and primarily rural, but also urban. They are predominantly men. They have virtually very insignificant concept of harm reduction. They have absolutely no knowledge, and of course they have no avenues. So we need very aggressive and sustained advocacy for awareness first, and they need cost-effective harm reduction avenues because of their economic status, and newer tobacco harm reduction technologies driven by new research and all will be beneficial. Now, the data that I was telling you on ENDS uses as one of the possible harm reduction avenues that is popular in India. We completed, we have 3,000 responders. This is only an indication because we have really not done the analysis properly. It is a complex, very large survey. But just some pointers that of 3,000 odd responders, 80% are men, 20% women. They're all highly educated, so they have at least some university degree or they are professionals. I think majority of them, their first exposure, predominant exposure to them, 71% were first exposed to smoking cigarette. So the tobacco exposure was through cigarette route. And they have a perception, and very large perception of them had a perception that e-cigarette is safer, or certainly not more harmful than cigarette. And in this population group, and if you look at this data, almost 40%, 30% could quit smoking completely, 13% had relapsed. So together, The first attempt, 43% people were able to quit smoking, 13% relapsed. 41% had reduced smoking. And so this figure is very, very encouraging because they have no support. And I think what they need is constant support to continue with that so that they can come out of smoking completely. They also had very positive impact on the existing medical conditions where almost 90% plus reported that whatever medical conditions, and their COPDs and all, are high. The last group, 2 minutes more, the last group are those who are smokeless tobacco users. India has global dominance on smokeless tobacco uses. We have no credible data on it, but GATS2 puts it to about 210 million people. And women are the primary users of smokeless tobacco. They have virtually no penetration of concept of harm reduction. So we need initiator and persistent advocacy and highly cost-effective avenues for harm reduction. Perhaps e-cigarettes or similar technologies may not be so useful because women don't like that. But snus and similar products can be useful to them. And our study shows that e-cigarette, we did have a small population group of under 500 responders. The experience was mixed. So I feel that e-cigarettes perhaps is not the best avenue. So I will conclude by saying that tobacco using population group in India is mixed age groups. The harm reduction options must appeal. They are primarily young people. We need graded harm reduction avenues because we have multiple types of users. Awareness and advocacy coupled with motivation is what is required. We have to adjust them for regional and linguistic requirement of the population that is being targeted. We have to consider the cultural association of a lot of these habits and also their economic parities. And so the best option, of course, remains that if we can prevent in long-term perception, prevent initiation at all. So betel nut becomes a very, very strong agent to target too, but also to quit without aid. But if not, then they must have an option to reduce the harm with the help of technologies, and economically suitable, quality assured, and technology-driven future for harm reduction is what is required. Thank you very much for your patience. I must thank again the organizers and Dr. Konstantinos. Thank you.